when my parents announced that they were giving away my childhood home. The estate I had cherished, the one I had spent years dreaming of restoring. I should have been devastated. But as I watched my younger brother smirk with triumph, completely unaware of what I had planned, I felt something entirely different. A slow-burning satisfaction. Because while they thought they were betraying me, they had no idea that I had been setting the stage for this moment for years. What they believed was their ultimate power play would soon become their biggest regret. The night of my engagement party was meant to be a celebration, but for my father, it was also the perfect time to humiliate me. The ballroom of the Mitchell estate shimmered under the glow of chandeliers, and the air buzzed with polite conversation and clinking champagne flutes. Logan, my fiancé, stood beside me, his hand resting gently on my back. He had sensed my unease all evening, though neither of us could have predicted what was coming next. Then my father, Jonathan Mitchell, raised his glass, and the room quieted. My mother, Eleanor, stood beside him, forcing a tight-lipped smile. And next to her, looking positively gleeful, was my younger brother, Ethan, the golden child, the heir, the one who had never worked a day in his life but still managed to be handed everything on a silver platter. The Mitchell estate will now belong to Ethan, my father announced, his voice cutting through the celebratory air like a blade. The words hit like a slap, but I didn't let my expression falter. I had spent years preparing for this, years of being overlooked, years of being told I was the disappointment. I saw the way my father was watching me, waiting for the reaction he wanted: shock, outrage, maybe even tears, but he would get none of it. "You've never respected the family legacy, Ava," he continued. "You walked away from the business, chose your own selfish pursuits, and turned your back on tradition. Ethan, on the other hand, has proven himself. He understands what it means to carry the Mitchell name forward." Proven himself? Ethan had barely graduated college. He spent his days living off trust funds, throwing lavish parties, and running half-baked real estate deals into the ground. Meanwhile, I had built my own architectural firm from nothing, had restored historic buildings across the city, and had made a name for myself in the field of urban development. All things my father dismissed as pet projects. The room had gone uncomfortably silent. All eyes were on me. They were expecting a reaction. Even Ethan, who had never put in an ounce of effort for anything in his life, looked like he was bracing for a scene. Instead, I took a slow sip of my champagne and set my glass down carefully. Then I smiled. "I see." My father's expression flickered, just for a moment. He hadn't expected that. "You're not going to fight this?" Ethan pressed, unable to hide his amusement. I met his gaze, holding it steady. "Why would I? It's just a house, right?" His smirk faltered, if only slightly. My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Ava, we thought it best to do this now, while everyone's here, so we could celebrate this transition as a family." "Yes," I said, nodding slowly. "At my engagement party." What a thoughtful choice. Logan squeezed my hand, silent support radiating through his touch. He knew what this house meant to me. He knew that I had grown up believing it would one day be mine, not out of greed, but because I was the only one who had ever truly loved it. My mother used to tell me bedtime stories about the estate's history. As a child, I spent hours sketching ideas on how to preserve its charm while updating it for the future. But none of that mattered now, or at least that's what they thought. Ethan clapped a hand on my shoulder, too pleased with himself to notice the subtle tension in my stance. "You made the right call, Ava. You're busy with your little architecture thing anyway. No need to get sentimental." Little architecture thing. That's what they called my multimillion-dollar firm. I took another sip of champagne, savoring the moment. Because while my family believed they had outmaneuvered me, they had no idea what I had been planning. For years, I had quietly purchased every piece of land surrounding the Mitchell estate. Every acre, every historic home nearby, every crucial lot they had been too short-sighted to claim when prices were low. I had done it methodically under different business names through silent partnerships, so well that even my father, the so-called real estate mogul, hadn't noticed. And now, the Mitchell estate was no longer just an isolated mansion. It was a cornerstone property in a massive historic redevelopment project that I had orchestrated from the ground up. A project that my family knew absolutely nothing about. But they would find out soon enough. For now, I simply smiled at my father, my mother, and my brother, the people who had spent years underestimating me. "Congratulations, Ethan," I said, lifting my glass. "I hope you're ready for the responsibility that comes with it." Then, as the party resumed and my parents basked in the attention, I turned to Logan. His expression was unreadable, but I could see the amusement in his eyes. He leaned in and whispered, "That was impressively calm." I tilted my head, my lips curving just slightly. "Oh, Logan," I murmured, voice just low enough for him alone. "They have no idea what's coming." As the music played on and the night carried forward, I savored the knowledge that I had already won. That night, after the party had ended and the last guests had trickled out of the Mitchell estate, I stood in my dimly lit office, running my fingers over the worn leather of an old sketchbook. The same one I had carried with me as a child, filled with intricate drawings of the house I once believed would be mine. I had dreamed of restoring its beauty, of preserving its history while breathing new life into its walls. But that dream had died a long time ago, burned away by years of being overlooked, dismissed, and told that I was nothing more than a rebellious daughter who didn't understand tradition. My father had made sure of that, but what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had never stopped planning. And now my plan was already in motion. Before we continue the story, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop the flag of your country in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story is reaching. Now let's get back to it. I traced the lines of one of my earliest sketches, a childish but ambitious attempt at redesigning the Mitchell Estate's ballroom. Even back then, I had understood the importance of preserving history while making it functional for the future. That was why my career had taken me toward historical architecture and urban redevelopment. My father had called it a betrayal. I called it a vision. And that vision was bigger than just one house. Bigger than the Mitchell estate itself. For the past 5 years, while my parents and Ethan had been too wrapped up in their own self-importance to notice, I had been methodically acquiring every piece of land surrounding the estate. Not under my own name, of course. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I had used a network of silent investors, holding companies, and strategic partnerships to make sure that every purchase appeared separate, unconnected. But the reality? Every single acre now belonged to me. Every historic home, every empty lot, every seemingly insignificant piece of property that my father had ignored because he had been too arrogant to see its value. And now, with the final permits in place, the project I had been building in secret was nearly ready to be revealed. The Mitchell Heritage District, a large-scale preservation initiative designed to restore the entire historic neighborhood, transforming it into a thriving cultural hub. Unlike my father's philosophy of buying land just to flip it for profit, I had spent years working alongside historians, preservationists, and city planners to ensure that these properties would not just be protected but revitalized. The best part? The estate my father had just handed to Ethan was now right in the middle of it, meaning every single move he made would be governed by strict preservation laws that I had helped craft. A slow smile spread across my face as I flipped through the official documents, already approved by the city council. Public records, open for anyone to see if they had been paying attention. But, of course, my family never had. The first real blow would come soon enough. Ethan would assume he had full control over the estate, that he could renovate and redesign it however he pleased. But the moment he tried to make a change, whether it was updating the kitchen, replacing the windows, or even repainting the exterior, he would be hit with a rude awakening. Because in the eyes of the law, the Mitchell estate was now a protected historic property. Any modifications would require approval from the Heritage District Board, a board that I just so happened to have a controlling influence over. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Logan stood there, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. He studied me for a long moment before finally speaking. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" His voice was even, but there was something else beneath it, something like admiration. I set the sketchbook down and leaned back in my chair. I had a strong feeling. He stepped inside, picking up one of the preservation plans I had laid out on my desk. So, let me get this straight. Not only did they just humiliate themselves by pulling that stunt at your engagement party, but they also handed Ethan a house that he won't even be able to maintain without running every decision through your preservation committee. That's about right. Logan let out a low whistle, shaking his head. Damn, that's... He broke off, letting out a small laugh. That's brilliant. I met his gaze, my smile turning sharp. They underestimated me, Logan. They always have. But by the time they realize what I've done, it'll be too late. The satisfaction should have been enough. The knowledge that I had outmaneuvered them, that I had built something far greater than they ever could have imagined. But deep down, there was still something else. Not anger, not bitterness, just a quiet, undeniable truth. I had never wanted to beat them. I had wanted them to see me, to recognize my worth before it came to this. But now, all they would see was the consequences of their own blindness. Logan reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. So, what's the next move? I exhaled slowly, my mind already racing through the timeline. The project launch is in 2 weeks. That's when the media will pick up the story, and the city will officially announce the Mitchell Heritage District. Ethan will find out then. But the real fallout. My fingers tightened slightly around his. That will come when he realizes just how deep I planned for this. Logan grinned. I almost feel bad for him. I arched an eyebrow. Almost. He laughed, shaking his head. Yeah, almost. Outside, beyond the office windows, the city lights stretched out toward the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, the Mitchell estate stood, its fate already sealed. Ethan and my parents might still believe they were in control, but the truth was, they had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. But soon they would. Very soon. The fallout arrived sooner than expected. 3 days after my engagement party, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I even answered. I took a slow sip of my coffee, let it ring twice more, then picked up. Hello, Ethan. There was no greeting on the other end, just heavy, irritated breathing before his voice cut through like static. What the hell did you do? I smiled against the rim of my cup. You'll have to be more specific. Don't play games with me, Ava, he snapped. I just got off the phone with the city. Apparently, I can't even repaint the damn house without getting some kind of special approval. And that's just the beginning. There are regulations for everything, the landscaping, the windows, even the freaking doorknobs. What did you do? I leaned back in my chair, tracing the wood grain of my desk with my fingertips. I didn't do anything, Ethan. You're the proud owner of a historic estate. Surely, you understand the responsibility that comes with that. You. He let out a bitter laugh, but I could hear the panic creeping into his voice. This is you. This is your doing. Not entirely. The Mitchell Heritage District has been in the works for years. You could have seen the public records if you had bothered to look. It's unfortunate you didn't do your due diligence before accepting the property. There was a long silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, the realization sinking in. Then, finally, he spoke quieter this time. You planned this. I didn't deny it. The call ended with him cursing under his breath. But I knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Hours later, I received another call. This time, it was my father. Ava, he said, his voice sharp, controlled. We need to talk. Now. I expected this. I had already cleared my schedule. When I arrived at my parents' home, the atmosphere was tense. My mother sat stiffly on the couch, twisting the bracelet on her wrist. My father stood by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, the same way he had when I was younger and about to be reprimanded. And Ethan was pacing, his usual smug confidence cracked open, revealing something rawer. You sabotaged us? He spat the moment I stepped inside. This whole district thing. It's a setup. I set my bag down, unbothered by his theatrics. It's a city-backed preservation project. Ethan. Not everything is about you. My father's expression was unreadable. You should have told us. I tilted my head. Would you have listened? Silence. We both knew the answer. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Ava, this is your family's home. Surely you wouldn't want to see it become trapped under these restrictions. I let out a soft laugh. Trapped? I'd call it protected. My father finally moved, stepping forward with the same air of authority he had always carried, the same presence that had once made me feel small. Enough, he said. You're going to fix this. I met his gaze evenly. No, I'm not. His eyes narrowed. You think you've won, don't you? I sighed, shaking my head. This was never about winning. It was about doing what should have been done years ago. The estate isn't just some trophy to be passed down. It's a part of history. But none of you ever saw it that way. Don't lecture me about history, my father shot back. This estate has been in our family for generations. And if it were up to you, Ethan would tear it apart with the first high-priced contractor who promised him a modern upgrade. I folded my arms. The house deserves better than that. Ethan scoffed. Oh, please, like you care. You just did this to screw us over. I turned to him, my expression unreadable. If I wanted to screw you over, Ethan, I wouldn't have made preservation an option. I would have bought the estate outright before you even had a chance. His jaw clenched. He knew I was right. My father knew it too. That was when the conversation shifted. My father exhaled slowly, his tone more calculated this time. What do you want? I leaned against the arm of the couch, taking my time before answering. You have two choices. One, you keep the estate and comply with the regulations. That means every renovation, every change, every little detail. Approved by the Heritage Board. Ethan made a sound of disgust. That's not happening. I shrugged. Then there's option two. Sell the property. My father's lips pressed into a thin line. And let me guess. You'll be the buyer? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My mother finally spoke, her voice hesitant. Ava, this is your brother's home now. I sighed softer this time. No, Mom. It's our family's history. And I'm the only one willing to protect it. The weight of my words settled over the room. My father looked away, jaw tight. My mother swallowed hard. Ethan, however, was still unwilling to let go. We're not selling, he said stubbornly. I pushed off the couch. Then enjoy your new responsibilities. I'm sure you'll love dealing with city permits and preservation consultants for the next few years. With that, I turned and walked toward the door. But just as I reached for the handle, my father's voice stopped me. We'll consider it. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see the cracks forming in his resolve. I had already won. 2 weeks later, the headlines broke. The Mitchell Heritage District, a bold preservation initiative reshaping the city's historical landscape. News outlets covered it relentlessly, showcasing renderings of the carefully preserved homes, the revitalization plans, and the economic benefits of the district. Investors, city officials, and preservationists praised the project, calling it a visionary step toward protecting the city's architectural history. And in every article, every press conference, my name was at the center of it all. But the part that interested me most wasn't the media attention. It was the silence from my family. For days I heard nothing. Not from my father, not from my mother, not even from Ethan, who was usually incapable of keeping his outrage bottled up for more than a few hours. I imagined the realization had finally sunk in. They had lost control and there was nothing they could do about it. That silence was broken 3 nights before the official project launch. A knock at my office door interrupted my late-night review of the final preservation reports. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. I set my pen down, exhaling slowly. Come in. Jonathan Mitchell stepped inside, his presence as imposing as ever, but the usual confidence, the unshakable authority was gone. He didn't sit. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he glanced around, taking in the architectural models displayed across the room, the awards on my shelves, the framed city development plans hanging on the walls. I let him take his time. Finally, he spoke. Sarah's charity gala is in 3 weeks. The estate's ballroom needs extensive restoration to meet safety regulations for public events. I folded my hands on my desk. The cultural center's ballroom will be ready by then. His jaw tightened. That's not what I asked. I met his gaze evenly. No, it's not. A heavy silence settled between us. My father had never been a man who admitted mistakes. He had spent decades building his empire on the idea that he was always right, always in control. But now, he stood in my office because I was the one who had built something greater than he had ever imagined. Something he could no longer ignore. And for the first time in my life, he was asking me for something. The estate's ballroom was always your favorite part of the house, he said, his voice quieter now. You used to sit there during parties, sketching ideas. I found one of your old notebooks a few days ago. I arched an eyebrow. Let me guess. Ethan left it behind when he moved out. A shadow passed over my father's face. He realized he wasn't capable of handling the estate's responsibilities. He turned the property over to us. I leaned back, watching him carefully. And now you're here. He nodded. To offer it to you. I had expected it. I had known that, eventually, this would be the outcome. But hearing the words from my father's mouth, watching the weight of that admission settle in his expression, it was still something I had never thought I'd see. Still, I didn't answer right away. I let him sit with it. Then, finally, I spoke. I'll take it. Relief flickered across his face. But I wasn't finished. On my terms, I added. The estate remains under the Heritage District's full protection. No more loopholes. No more discussions about altering its history. It will be preserved, protected, and used as an educational and cultural site. He didn't argue. He just nodded. My mother arrived the next day. She didn't come to negotiate. She didn't try to justify anything. Instead, she simply walked through the estate with me, room by room, her fingers trailing over the ornate moldings, the antique furnishings, the faded remnants of the past. I see it now, she said softly as we stood in the ballroom. You weren't trying to change history. You were trying to honor it. I didn't respond right away, because deep down, I knew this was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. And for once, it was enough. The grand opening of the Mitchell Heritage District was held on the same day I officially reclaimed the estate. As I stood on the restored balcony, overlooking the bustling event below, guests mingling, students discussing architecture with preservationists, city officials praising the initiative, I realized that I had done more than just win. I had changed the future of this place forever. The Mitchell estate was no longer just a symbol of old wealth and outdated traditions. It was a testament to progress, resilience, and the power of seeing beyond what others expect of you. And that was more valuable than any inheritance my parents could have ever given me. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this story? If you loved the way Ava took back control, comment number 2 below. If you think she should have handled things differently, comment number 7. I want to know your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel Mr.HeartVibes, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new viral story. Let's keep this conversation going. Drop your comments below.